biased. If you've seen the film on my dad's case, you know how biased he was. But despite all of that, after a 6-month trial, there was not a single guilty verdict for the 4 men. So when my father was indicted, 3 other men were indicted along with him, Palestinian men as well. And the reason for that is because they used something called the RICO law, which is generally used against the mob, but also political activists, including in the past civil rights activists, African American activists. And what that means is you charge someone with a conspiracy. So if we're charged in a conspiracy, anything my co-defendant says or does, I can be held liable for. But even beyond that, the government was bringing in website links that nobody had accessed, even, not a single one of the defendants. And we later discovered that that completely backfired, and the jury was just flabbergasted, and it completely counted against the government in their case. They brought in Israeli witnesses to testify, survivors of bombings and their family members, and policemen. And of course, the government itself wasn't even alleging that my father had anything to do with these violent acts. But despite that, they wanted to intimidate the jury, to emotionally blackmail them, and to basically sway their emotions, regardless of the truth. And that, I think, also didn't really work to their credit. I think the jury, and I think a smart thing our lawyers did was they didn't cross-examine any of these witnesses. So they basically made the statement that this is irrelevant to the case. And in fact, after months and months of the government presenting its case, our lawyers stood up and said, on behalf of Dr. Al-Arian, we present no defense, because our defense was the Constitution in the First Amendment. So of course at the time we were very scared about this. It was a very risky strategy, but thankfully it was successful, and the jury could really see how powerful that statement was. That we didn't even bring a witness, nothing. And after 13 days of deliberation, the jury acquitted my father. Like I said, not a single guilty verdict after among hundreds of charges among the 4 men. But despite that, my father remained in prison. Even though he ended up signing a plea agreement with the government months later. He was sort of backed into a wall. They threatened to retry him because a couple of the jurors refused to fully acquit my father. And when the other jurors would ask them, why not? I mean, they're clearly innocent. The government failed to prove its case. The burden of proof is on the government. They would just say, it's a feeling we have, So they relied on their emotions and their presumably racist views, and not on anything that was actually presented in court. So, like I said, my father sort of left with very few choices. Either he had to face a whole other trial, raising more and more funds for the attorneys. At that point, we were very exhausted. I mean, emotionally, financially, and in all the ways you can imagine after going through that ordeal. So, my father ended up signing a plea agreement, basically amounting to some made-up charges the government devised to save face. And they amounted to bringing in a scholar from Britain to work in the U.S., helping his brother-in-law, my uncle, with immigration matters, and supposedly lying to a journalist, which if that were a crime, I think half of Congress would be in jail. So, it just shows their desperation. And this journalist himself says he doesn't believe he was lied to, so you could just see the lengths they went to. He signed this plea agreement. He was told, well, okay, we don't expect you to cooperate. He actually had the government take out the provision that's normally in the plea agreement that you have to cooperate in other cases and that sort of thing. He had them take that out and promise him he wouldn't have to cooperate in any other case, that his business with the government was over, and that he would be deported. Of course, it's a sad day when you have to leave America to be free, but that's the place we found ourselves in after this ordeal. But they went back on their agreement, and what we've heard is that it was unheard of before the Bush administration for the Department of Justice to make an agreement like that on their word, and then just go back on it. Like, no regard for justice, no regard for their word, nothing. And you really see that in other situations with the Bush administration. You really see this politicization of justice. You saw the attorneys who were fired because they refused to bow down to the Bush administration's demand to prosecute people based on politics. And you saw that with my father's case, with other similar political prosecutions. So a prosecutor by the name of Gordon Cromberg, who's based in Virginia, Northern Virginia, was very, very upset with the verdict. He was upset with the plea agreement, which he described as a bonanza to our attorneys. And he made it his life's mission to keep my father in jail for the rest of his life by any means necessary, even if it meant he would exploit the position and the power and the authority that he's in to do that. And just to give you some background on Gordon Cromberg, he's very, very pro-Israel. He's made his opinions very well known. He's blogged about his fear of Palestinians online. He's made a slew of Islamophobic and anti-Muslim comments on the record. Just to give you a few, when he was trying to bring my father up from Florida to Virginia a few years ago, it was during the Muslim month of Ramadan, and our attorneys asked, since my father wouldn't have to testify before this grand jury for